Our language has been stolen. We as humans developed language over millions of years. We did it. We did not have a dictionary because we never needed one. The languages we spoke were unique to us. Now that is a problem when you are attempting to control a whole population. When the white Englishmen found the Aboriginal population of Australia, it was roughly divided into 29 parts. Each part had its own language. Each tribe or group of the 29 had developed their own way of speaking to each other, taught to each other generationally by those using and developing the languages. The problems that this presents to the Englishmen trying to control the population is manifold. For one example, when you were printing up your dictates, you would have to understand each of the 29 languages to formulate your signage that contained your dictates. After deciphering, then translating the 29 languages, you would have to print up 29 different sets of signage, each in a different language, to force your written dictates onto the Aboriginal population as a whole. This is very time-consuming, costly, and very difficult to do. The answer? Force everyone to speak the same language. Now, this difference in tongues was not limited to Aborigines. I only use them as an example. Every region in the world had separate tribes, groups that all spoke differently from each other. This did not stop them from communicating with each other when needed. It only stopped the tribes from a deeper understanding of rituals, ideas, customs of the other tribes in the regions. The stealing of language, the usurping of our communications was simply done by brute force. If you failed to adopt or understand the tongue of the guy with the gun, he would just shoot you, kill you, or subject you to some ungodly punishment. The guy with the gun would also take all the resources, so when you came begging, wanting, needing food, water, land rights, well, you had better show up speaking the language of the guy with the gun, or you would be forcefully denied, maybe locked up, maybe even killed. So our spoken language was usurped using violence, forcing everyone to speak the language of the guy that had the weapons of violence. Now, when you write down the verbal sounds of the language, when you dedicate the verbal sounds of human communication to writing, I call that VOYXU. When you type letters, you are using VOYXU. Any symbol written by the hand of a man is VOYXU. In the early days of VOYXU, no one but priests, scribes, kings could learn the art of writing. Peasants were not allowed to write. Not because peasants were not able to grasp the concept of writing, not because the peasants were dumb, But because the rulers, the kings, the scribes, the holy men wanted to keep their VOYXU secret and controlled. When you look historically at the decrees, documents, or holy books written in the past, there is nothing in there that is special. There is nothing in there that is groundbreaking. There is nothing in there that anyone taught how to read the language could not understand. That is why kings, scribes, and priests controlled the language, the written language, with violence. They lorded over the people with their written VOYXU. This book says God wants you to be poor. Where does it say that? Right here. You can't read it, you poor soul, so you must trust that I'm telling you the truth. Well, what if I don't? Well, then the royal guard will lock you up until you do. Well, then I really do believe you're telling me the truth. You see how easy that is? The first laws were written in stone by a violent leader in Babylon, so his VOYXU would endure. Indeed it did, as we still have copies of his Babylonian law to this day. We are still controlled by many of the same violence-based laws today. Now imagine you could not read the written laws, which most people could not. Imagine you had to live by something you could not read. The people did just that. The laws were put into stone so the words of the ruler would live on past him. How do you make generations of people that never meet you, never know you, never see you, follow exactly what you say for them to do? Use VOYXU. Here is where it gets sick. The VOYXU itself has no power. The VOYXU is simply a representation of the mind that uses the hand to form it. In order for any VOYXU to take power in the modern day, the rulers, kings, or leaders have to use violence. Violence is the key. Previous to 40,000 years ago, we developed VOYXU ourselves to communicate without sound peacefully. We used it to represent our mind, our pure mind, untainted by leaders' ideas of how we should act or behave. We did this using sticks or fingers in the dirt. Very similar to how in dirt lot football games you draw the play on the ground to show the guys where you want them to go for the next play. You draw a dot and you say, "That's you." Then you draw directly on the dirt a path that you want that person to go. This way, we are all on the same page as to our movements. This is a very, very, very useful technique of communication that we developed for us. A technique we use peacefully to help us live. This technique was stolen, usurped, when some violent men secretly gathered in the caves of Iberia about 40,000 years ago, where they used pigments to draw VOYXU on the walls of caves, communicating ideas that only they were allowed to see. These rogues, these thieves, these violent monsters became what we call the 1% today. There is an unbroken line of violent leaders, kings, priests, that came directly from these caves in Iberia that rule the world today using their violence and VOYXU. They took our VOYXU, our developed way of communicating with each other, using it in secret to communicate with their chosen few on exactly how to steal, control all the resources of every region they invaded or occupied. Step 1. Formulate the complete takeover of resources in secret. Step 2. Communicate the plan in secret through spoken language that only those present can hear, and use VOYXU to illustrate the plan that only those present can see or understand. Step 3. Unleash the violence on everyone else. Step 4. Total control of resources. A win. The 1% formulates the devious plans, then it takes about 9% of the population to inflict the devastating violence on the rest of us. This means about 10% of the population controls 99% of the resources. This formula holds true today. It has been our reality for around 4,000 years now. Once you understand that our language, our communications that we develop naturally, organically over millions and millions of years have been stolen and turned into VOYXU, then you can understand that the VOYXU is meaningless without the violence. This means that you are being controlled right now with violence. The VOYXU, symbols, or written language is being used as a vehicle for the violence. Remember the 10 Commandments? That VOYXU was written on tablets of stone for you to follow. Now, what happens if you don't follow it? God will punish you. You know that legal code that you live by in your country that your violent leaders wrote down telling you they call it the rule of law? Well, what happens if you don't follow it? The people hired by the leaders will come for you with guns. If you resist the enforcers, you will be violenced. You will be beat. You will be kicked. You will be shot at. You will be neutralized. You will be restrained. You will be caged. So your dear leaders, your councilmen, your mayors, your governors, your congressmen, your senators, your presidents, pretend when they tell you it's a free country. These leaders have no intention of letting you do as you wish. The modern leaders pretend they are civil, all the while beating and killing us into submission. They have written their verbal utterances using VOYXU for you to then conform to. And if you don't conform to their control, you will be subject to violence. Feeling stressed? Well, I don't blame you. Every second you live under the rule of law, you are living under the threat of death. If you do something that your dear leaders don't approve of, they will use our language they stole from us to point to their VOYXU they made using our technique of written communication that they stole from us to tell you that you are wrong and what you did was bad because it's illegal. Then they unleash their paid hellhounds to violence you into submission. I sincerely ask you, my friends, my fellow people, us, when will this violence against humanity end?